Too Much is a podcast series proudly supported by Victoria Police, who are looking for more women to join their ranks. Consider making the switch and explore a career with Victoria Police. Visit the link in the show notes or head to police.vic.gov.au.
I was very nerdy. I'm a nerd from way back. I've always cared about public policy. I sort of read public policy papers on the weekend, as my hobby. But I just never thought that there was a place for someone like me in politics.
Every woman remembers the time they were too something at work. Too ambitious, too soft, too bossy. Hi, I'm Briana Blackett, your host for Season 3 of Too Much, The Switch. I started out as a journalist. I lived abroad and travelled the world, helping to cover breaking news. I co-founded an international news organisation. But since becoming a parent and solo carer to my 2 kids, my working life has needed to change over and over again. And I'm not alone. Join me as I interview 8 extraordinary women who made the switch from one career to another and found success. We'll also find out how defying the suffocating stereotypes women face at work helped them get there. Australia's own Carla Zampatti was the picture of style, bright and bold and arrestingly chic. One word you'd never hear to describe her perfectly curated collections is nerdy, which is why Zampatti's youngest daughter, self-confessed nerd Allegra Spender, never saw herself as a natural fit to lead her late mother's fashion empire. But that's where she ended up, before a runway-worthy career pivot in 2022 when she rode the Teal wave into federal politics. Today, Allegra joins me to discuss how being too nerdy helped her break the mould in fashion, her switch from palettes to politics, and why playing to your strengths is the key to every professional pivot. Allegra Spender, thank you for joining us on Too Much. Can you tell us a bit about your career journey?
I have made so many switches, enough for a whole house of lighting. I started out in consulting straight out of uni because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I then worked in UK Treasury because I was interested to see how does business experience play out in the public sector. I worked for a not-for-profit in Kenya. I worked as a change leader in a hospital in London. Then I came home and ran my family's fashion business, then ran an education charity, and now I'm a politician. So I feel like I've covered almost the entire economy, really.
Okay, none of those dots seem to link naturally to me. But I love that we are where we are today.
Yeah.
You've covered so many different journeys. But where we are in federal politics today, was that always part of the plan?
No, it wasn't. I think if you'd asked me 4 years ago, Allegra, are you going to get into politics? I would have laughed. It wasn't on my agenda. My dad was a politician, so in theory, when I was about 12 years old, I think it was on my agenda. But I had looked at politics and I just didn't see a place for someone like me. Like, I've always cared about public policy. I sort of read public policy papers on the weekend, as my hobby. But I just never thought that there was a place for someone like me in politics. And it wasn't really until I got approached in 2022 that I thought, look, what's the worst that can happen? Public humiliation and I lose. So that's why I decided to go ahead.
Well, what was it that made you decide to give it a go?
I was approached in that case, and I don't know I would have had the guts personally just to say, hey, I'm going to stand, without some people encouraging me. I felt very strongly about a bunch of issues that I felt weren't being addressed. Now, climate was the obvious one. Women, equality of women in Parliament, and we are now 49% of this current Parliament, which is like a world of change compared to previous terms. But also issues of integrity, but also just this sense that I've grown up in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I've lived there pretty much my whole life. And I constantly felt that kind of the values of the community were not being really represented by sometimes the clown show that you see in federal politics. And so I was approached to stand and I thought about it really hard and I thought, this matters. I do think we have to make some change, and I'm not sure just hoping it's going to change and being frustrated is enough. And so if there is a chance that you can make a difference, and I'm willing to at least try, because if you don't try, you don't see.
We talk to a lot of women on this podcast about they're too something. Too bold, too quiet, too bossy. Your too something was too nerdy. Why was that?
Well, I was very nerdy. I was at school. I was a complete nerd. I did 4-year maths, physics and chemistry. It's like I'm a nerd from way back. We used to have people over for dinner and make them take a topic of debate and be on one side or the other and occasionally debate it. See, that's the sort of nerdy enforced fun that I come from. But I think it was a bit of reaction to, to the fashion industry, particularly as a kid being being the daughter of a fashion designer, I think I was rebelling a little bit from my very glamorous mum. You know, I would wear hoodies and clothes that she would hate, and I wouldn't look after my appearance, and mum would be somewhat frustrated, and she'd be like, Allegra. And I was like, well, you know, I don't care about all these superficial things. It's about the substance. That's what really matters. And I've learned a lot over time that you have to have the substance, but you also have to work out how to communicate it to people as well. And that's something that has taken me quite a lot of time to realise that, you know, you've got to get the substance really right in your head, but you also have to communicate it. It's not good enough just to know the answer. You do actually need to find ways to get other people on board. And that means not being too nerdy, not being only caring about getting the right answer. It's also about actually helping bringing people along as well.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. How does too nerdy play into being in politics? Because we're in an era of clickbait, of we often have soundbite over substance. How does being too nerdy, too in those policy weeds, impact you every day?
I guess it's like being aware of it, and then me and also my team trying to make sure I don't sort of lean in too hard. Like I said, you know, you got to do the hard work, but then when you're doing a sort of 1 minute Instagram video, you know, you have to communicate to where people are, meet people where they are. So we've had quite a lot of fun actually about trying to convert. I talk a lot about tax, so trying to convert tax policy and economic policy into things that people find engaging. We've used a cake and cut it up in the shape of how much is GST and how much is personal income tax and how much is company tax. We used M&Ms to try and explain the federal budget. So it's actually been quite a lot of fun of trying to turn that kind of nerdy information into something that can engage people and bring people along rather than sort of overwhelm them with acronyms.
When you decided to leave the family business, I mean, when most of us leave a job, it's a big decision in and of itself. But for you to make that decision, you weren't just leaving a job, you were leaving a legacy. It was your mum's legacy, right? What was it like for you then? I mean, there was more to it, to making that decision. Was there an emotional component?
There definitely was an emotional component, and there still is. I'm still involved in the business. My brother now runs it, and family business is not easy. Anyone who's ever worked in one would know that you've got all the business issues and then you have the family issues, and they just all come together. And that is a bit of a challenge. And I think for me, I never intended to stay as long as I did, but it is hard to leave the business, both because I worked in that business since I was a kid, so I'm emotionally attached to the business. Partly it was also a time of life. I left when I just had my third child. I had been in the business during the time that I had each of my kids. My husband had started his own business. One of the reasons I ended up staying as long as I did was partly financial for the family, while he's doing something more risky, me doing something more solid. So lots of different factors play into that. You know, I was inspired by my mum, who followed her dreams. I knew that running her business wasn't my life dream, that I probably cared more on sort of social issues than I did on fashion. I like fashion, but it's not my calling. And so at a certain point, I just felt I had to leave and support that. But it was a difficult conversation. Lucky for me, Mum, because she had followed her passions, she understood why I wanted to go, and not all families are like that, but she also wanted me to stay.
But before you moved into the role that you're in now, you didn't go straight from your family business to this one. You were running an education charity as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what that taught you about taking the skills that you have in one area and moving them into another place?
Sure. I mean, and actually, interestingly, leaving the family business, one of the things was, are my skills going to be relevant in something else? I think that is always a big concern I've had in doing a switch. And interestingly, to make that easier, I did a little bit of volunteering in education, and that helped me in that space go, okay, these skills that I've learned in my sort of very diverse career, they do apply in education in this area that I really wanted to get into. I didn't know, to be honest, getting into politics, whether all my skills would play into it or not. But again, what I found is you do bring the experience from the different parts of your career to each new job. And I think having a bit of confidence around that is really important, knowing that there's value of the experience that you've got, and you just need to work out how does it apply to that new kind of sector. You know, so for me, to be honest, being in politics, having had such a varied career, it's a real win, because I've seen so many parts of the community, the economy, that I get to draw on all of that in politics. So weirdly enough, my very diverse career, I think, is almost a perfect precursor to being in politics.
You've touched on a magic word, confidence. How important is confidence to how we reinvent ourselves in our professional lives anyway?
For me, it's massive. And actually, one of the big questions I had when I was asked to run or to at least think about running in politics was I wasn't sure I would be the right person. And in that case, I reached out to a bunch of people I knew and I admired and said, look, confidentially, I've been approached. Can you please give me an honest view? Because I was worried I wouldn't be able to appeal to these different people, that I hadn't done enough, that I didn't know enough. And it was really through the encouragement of those people that gave me the confidence to do it, because I don't think myself alone, it's frightening. It's scary, and I didn't want to stuff it up. I didn't want to also stuff it up if somebody else could do it better than me and miss the opportunity, which I could see that there really was one.
So, as you said, your father was in politics. Your grandfather was also in politics.
Yeah.
So, you've had some experience with being at least in the realm of politics. But was it different for you when you entered into it? Did you feel pressure to be a certain way? Did you feel you might have to live up to certain expectations? Or did you feel prepared for it?
I remember just as Parliament was starting the first term and going, it's intimidating. I didn't really know, I don't think any or many of the politicians in the room, in the House of Reps or in the Senate, before I started. And someone said to me, it was really helpful, they said, look, you've been elected by 100 and, whatever, 1,000 people, and you have as much right as anyone does to be there. And your job is to advocate for and stand for your community. And that's your job. So it is intimidating, but if you keep on coming back to kind of your mission, I think sometimes it's having your mission clear in your heart gives you the confidence, because it's like, it's not about me. It's about my job and who I represent. And it's my job to represent these people, so I need to go out and do it, even if on some days it feels pretty intimidating. But you just have to screw your courage into the sticking place and get up and do it, because that's what you're there for.
Does having a mission run through your life and how you've made decisions? Because as you've mentioned, you've done so many different things. Was there one central driving force that maybe you weren't even aware of it that helped you make your choices?
I've recognised, I've had a lot of opportunities in life, and particularly I reflect in relation to my mum. She came out as an immigrant. She arrived in Australia when she was 11, no English, left school at 14, created a really good life for herself. And, I've had a lot of opportunities. And one thing I'm super, super passionate about that's run through my life is how do you make sure as many people as possible have great opportunities? And that, weirdly enough, has come into tax reform. But it's played out in why did I work in Kenya for a not-for-profit? Because passionate about people around the world having a chance to raise their kids and stay healthy and all the things that we take for granted here too. So I think that's been a big mission. And weirdly enough, the other side is probably a businessy thing, which is I grew up in mum's business. We worked there every single holiday, my siblings and I, the whole way through school and uni and everything. And that sense of you have to also create opportunities through business for people to be able to thrive. So kind of those dual things, I think, have really driven me in a lot of the different career choices I've made.
You told us earlier about how you're learning to use your two nerdiness to your advantage through some fun ways.
Yeah.
How can we decide what are our strongest traits and how can we use those in our careers, but also how can we approach some of those things we're not very good at?
It's really tricky because, I think early on in my career and probably, for at least the first 10 plus years, I think I felt very weighed down by my weaknesses. I would look at people and go, why am I not more like them? And the truth is I wanted to be like them, but it wasn't really how I was wired. And so it took me actually quite a long time to reconcile myself to these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. What I need to do here is actually play more to my strengths and compensate my weaknesses rather than constantly try and push myself to constantly deal only with the weaknesses. An exercise I found really useful that I've done in my old job and in this job was to do something called Clifton Strengths, where you do a survey and you come up with these 3 strengths. And then we did an exercise where everyone has to look at the balconies and basements of their strengths. So the balconies are kind of what are the superpowers that your strengths give you, but the basements are what are the downsides of all the sort of weaknesses that your strength exposes you to. And that was such a useful framing because for my team, they could then tease me about I was too much of this or that without me being too critical, because I was like, I'm good at this, I'm not very good at this. And they go, yes, Allegra, that's correct, you're not very good at that. And so it sort of created a space where it's okay to be different. It's okay to have different strengths. You just need to be aware of it. And then you also need to match them to the jobs. And you need to make sure across a team you have that right balance balance. You know, you can't be everyone's strategic and no one's actually executing. So you've got to find that balance. I guess that's what I've learned, is just try and find sort of mechanisms to try and understand your strengths. Accept them in your heart, be kind to yourself about what they are, but then also be realistic about what that means you're good at and what you're not good at, and not be afraid of not being great at stuff.
It's really hard to silence that inner self-critic though, isn't it? Especially when you're looking at other people around you. It can be really easy to assume that other people, everything comes naturally to while you're struggling. For women who are listening who might be considering making a career change, what would your advice be for them?
I think one of some of the best things I've ever done is actually work experience. When I was thinking of getting into a hospital to work in the sort of administration of a hospital, I spent a day following around an hospital administrator, because it gives you a sense of what the job is. And I think that is really hard actually for people to get a real sense of that. So I fully say, do some work experience, do some volunteering, because at least for me, the confidence is a big part. So once I sort of believed that I could, then you can also sell yourself better in an interview, because you can see how your skills will be useful in this completely different environment. For quite a few of these things, you know, you might have to take a step back to go forward, and accepting that and trying to be realistic about that. One challenge I would have to people is, I think quite often people think, okay, well, I'll do that by going back and doing some more study. And I think in certain professions you have to, and in certain situations that's really important. But I think there are other ways. Sometimes studying just puts it off. You might be better off coming in and trying to do a sideways move. So if you've got great communication skill, but you want to move into the environmental sector and policy making, well, come in and do comms for the environmental sector and then move into policy making. Sometimes those degrees, they take years, particularly if you're trying to balance work and life, and they don't actually necessarily open the doors as openly as perhaps you would like them to.
And I guess a pivot doesn't necessarily have to be a stop and a start. It can be a smoother transition than that.
I think that's right. And I think looking for, again, volunteering opportunities, just ways in that you can learn from.
So I would love to hear your advice to those people who are currently making the switch into something new. How do you handle those early days and weeks and months where you're learning this new career and this new role for yourself?
Keep on going, be kind to yourselves. It's hard. They say it's, drinking from a fire hose, and it really is. But I think that idea of trying to set yourself realistic goals about where you will be at different points can help, because you're not going to be a master within the first month or two or whatever. But if you can show value to yourself and to others, that's kind of the best thing that you can do.
Is there ever a moment where you've made a switch and you've jumped into this new role and you've thought, oof,
why did I do that?
Yeah.
Not really, but it's not that everything lived up to what I had hoped. I remember I said I worked in the UK Treasury for a bit, and then I moved to Kenya, and that was actually a bit of a dream of mine. I'm, still pretty idealistic, wanted to make the world a better place, and it was quite a bit of a dream out of uni and everything to work in development economics. And I realised actually that I didn't think I was particularly well suited to that, and that was tough because it was something that I thought it might be my calling in life, and it wasn't. So I think that can be hard. By nature, that job wasn't forever. It was only sort of a 9-month volunteer job. So, I got to say, okay, fine, that's not me. But yeah, it's sometimes hard to deal with that. And again, sometimes you just need to call it.
Yeah. No. What do you think the hardest thing is about deciding that you might need a change? And how do you know?
It's hard. I really agonised. And what I used to do is I used to take myself away for a night a year, and I'd write a lot. And I've found I'm not one of those sort of regular diary keepers, but when I'm thinking things through, it helps me to write down what I'm thinking about and why I'm thinking about it. And then I read a bunch of different books, and some were useful, some weren't. They had different exercises in them. But I think it probably took me a number of years to go, I really need to get out of fashion. It's not right for me. And to try and, again, have the confidence, that inner confidence to leave, and the resilience to go, okay, this is not going to be straightforward. It's not like I'm going to walk straight into another job. It's going to be a bit messy. So that's okay. So particularly for someone, I've always worked very hard. I've always been pretty ambitious. So it's hard sometimes when you don't know what that next step is. That's a bit scary. But yeah, so that was some of the stuff that helped me. And it took, I think, genuinely years.
Yeah, pivoting is a process.
It is.
Right? So how have you found this latest pivot into politics? Have you got to that point yet where you, in your mind, wake up and go, I'm Allegra Spender, politician? At what point do you fully become that new identity?
Yeah, it's interesting. I really love my job. Some days are pretty tough, but I do genuinely love my job, but it doesn't mean that some days I go, oh my God. So it's the diversity that I love. But I guess the other thing I love, and it's taken me again to this stage of my career, you go, okay, well, let's try and do this differently, have experiment. And I think that's quite important in jobs, not to be afraid to be a bit creative, and both in terms of how you do it, like doing these videos with M&Ms on economics, because it's, not be afraid to do that. No, not all jobs are going to have that opportunity, but particularly with such a time-limited job, I'm only there for 3 years at a time. They can vote me out and I won't have the job anymore. So it forces you to go, okay, well, what I want done, and make sure that you take the full advantage of it. So go, you might not do this job for very long, so don't die wondering.
To people listening today who are either facing a situation where they need to make a pivot or they're feeling like they might need to make a pivot, what would your quick tip be to them if they could just walk away with one thing?
Get exposure to what you think you might want to do. Make it real, and then you have a real option you're reacting to, not just some sort of fantasy about what a journalist might look like, or what, any of those things. Get real and just talk to people and try and spend a day in a life of somebody doing something that you think you need to do.
And if they have a look and it's not quite what they think,
find something else. And then also know yourself. Like, I think once you know what gives you joy, and this is a question I always ask in an interview, is what gets you going? What gives you joy in your job? Because sometimes you might want to work in a sector that you care about, but the truth is, if you're not going to get any joy from the actual job, it's going to be a grind. So you've got to find that intersection between something that gives you meaning, but also just in the day-to-day, you like doing the stuff that has to be done.
Allegra Spender, thank you so much for joining us for this season of Too Much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next time on Too Much, Lana Jones, a prima ballerina turned midwife, on being too strong.
I was that reliable dancer. I was that one you could put on for opening night, do the big ballets. I was that person. I delivered. And so it is really strange for me to now be in this role where I'm second guessing myself entirely. And it's because it is life and death.
Too Much is a podcast series proudly supported by Victoria Police, who are looking for more women to join their ranks. Consider making the switch and explore a career with Victoria Police. Visit the link in the show notes or head to police.vic.gov.au.